Initial 53-man roster set, practice squad set, Bills set to open the regular season. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast, everyone. Kevin Carroll with you as usual on a busy Bills day.
And I'm Andy Young, and apparently we're all set. Here we go.
We are all set. Maybe take a little time off right now, Andy. You and I recharge the batteries before the season gets underway and the real practices begin as they prepare for the Cardinals coming up next week. 53-man roster, Andy, and I don't want to bury the lead, but one of the big stories around the NFL, one of the cooler stories in sports, is something we've been keeping an eye on really since back in the spring when all this went down, is, of course, Buffalo Joe Andreessen, as he is now known Buffalo Joe, makes the 53-man roster, Andy, and I could literally just talk about Joe and this whole thing for half an hour. You talk about being a little kid and saying when someone says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you're out here in Buffalo and you know he said, I'm going to be a Buffalo Bills player when I grow up. And here he is on the Bills 53-man roster. So many cool storylines with this.
Yeah, this is just a remarkable journey for a kid who grew up rooting for the Buffalo Bills, 10, 15 minutes away from Highmark Stadium. There's a picture that surfaced of him with J.P. Lossman getting autographs, and then there's another picture of him from a couple of years ago wearing a Matt Milano jersey.
Oh, boy.
And we actually asked him who his favorite Bills player was growing up, and he chuckled, and he said, in recent years it was Matt Milano. And, yeah, I know he's my teammate now. So really just a remarkable journey for a guy who was an unlikely candidate to make this team, right?
Right.
Goes from Lancaster High School. He's an all-state player, leads them to the state finals, goes on to FCS Bryant University in Rhode Island, where he becomes an FCS All-American. Final season, comes back home, goes to the University at Buffalo, has a fantastic season there. Then he doesn't get drafted. He thought he had a chance to go in the late rounds. Didn't happen for him. Bills bring him in for a rookie tryout. They needed another linebacker. They sign him to the dotted line.
Fate,
yeah,
right there.
It's awesome. The rest is history. And then, he goes through rookie minicamp. He goes through OTAs, minicamp, training camp, and you kind of see him working with the third team. And then he gets his shot, right? Like, you didn't see a whole lot from him just because of where he was buried on the depth chart. Then there's some injuries. Matt Milano gets hurt. They decide to keep Terrell Bernard out of the lineup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so Joe Andreessen gets his chance to start in the preseason against the Steelers' number one offense. And he goes out there and has just a whale of a game. That dude absolutely showed out, and that was a big part of why Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott decided to keep him, because Brandon Beane said, look, it wasn't too big for him. He went out there against NFL starters and made some plays. Tackles Justin Fields in the open field. We know a lot of players in the league who've had problems with that over the years. Tackles Jaylen Warren, who's a very good running back in the open field. And it all sort of, the stars aligned for him, and then he makes the team. And it's really been really incredible. The whole Buffalo Joe thing is super cool.
I go back to the beginning of training camp when we first got out to Fisher, and you telling me, you shoot this. I got to follow Joe Andreessen around, the local kid. I'm going to do a story on him. And the first thing to pop into my mind is that's a cool story for the beginning of training camp.
Right.
Because it's probably not something we're going to be talking about much as the summer goes on.
Yeah.
And the dude just, in practice, in games, you hear Brandon Beane basically say, and I'm not quoting him here, but some people, when the chance is put in front of them, don't deliver. Joe Andreessen was given the chance to deliver and did, and then some in that Steelers game and throughout practice and training camp throughout this entire summer. And like you said, it's cool. There's T-shirts made. Like going into the 53-man roster, it's like, okay, there's T-shirts made. We really want to see him on there just for the story so it could keep going. And
his high school, Lancaster High School, his head coach, Eric Rupp, who's still the head coach there, broke down their team huddle after practice and announced, just want to let you guys know, Joe Andreessen made the 53-man roster of the Buffalo Bills, and all the kids just go nuts, and then they start chanting, Buffalo Joe, Buffalo Joe. I mean, that's so cool. I mean, he was in high school there, 6-7 years ago?
Right.
It's really incredible.
Yeah, such a cool story, and it's cool that it keeps rolling along. I'm watching the interviews with him after practice. I'm an emotional guy, Andy. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm like, is he going to, is this moment big enough to cry?
Did you cry?
When I made the Bills? Well, the Bills weren't good.
No,
back
watching
then.
Joe Andreessen's interviews about making the Bills.
No, I thought it was cool. It was like.
It's kind of like people have made the comparison to Rudy, and it's not that.
Right.
But, it's still really cool in that vein. It draws those emotions. It's this hometown kid, grew up rooting for this team, and then suddenly he's got this unlikely path to get to the NFL, and he makes it, right?
Yeah.
It's super cool. And he's got a long way to go, and he said that. Look, I'm not here just to, have a party to say I made it. There's nothing guaranteed, and I want to stick. So I've got to go out there and prove myself just as I have every single day that I still deserve to be on this roster and in the NFL because he's one signing of another player away from getting cut.
Right. Absolutely. And, he talks about Matt Milano was his favorite player. Everyone has favorite players. I'm 50 years old. I have favorite players in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought I read online there was a connection, like his linebackers coach at Bryant was a teammate of Milano's while at Boston College.
I didn't know that.
I can't remember, and John Scott used to hate when I did this because I never remember where I read stuff. Could be true, could not be true, but I thought I saw that somewhere.
Okay.
That there's that whole connection there, and that Andreessen, we're not saying he's the next Matt Milano, but has the body type and maybe some traits like Matt Milano has, and like you getting to work with me after watching me on TV for all those years. I know that was probably exciting too.
Inside joke for those who don't know, I interned under Kevin many, many, many years ago.
Yeah.
And we ended up working together. So
and we still do.
Yeah, so when I walked in, I said, somebody asked me, who's your favorite sports anchor of all time? Well,
John Murphy.
In recent years, it's been Kevin Carroll. Well, I know he's my teammate now, but we'll get through it together.
It's so great to really realize your dreams, Andy. But there have been other local guys. I mean, this is a connection from when you and I were both down in Jamestown. J.U. Colcrick was on the Bills for a while. Actually, I remember it perfectly. Picked up a first down in a game against the Bengals. I believe it's the one where Stevie Johnson went off and they ended up crushing the Bengals. But that was always such a cool story. I think he first signed as an undrafted free agent with the Jets, but ended up with the Bills and did indeed get to play for the team he followed as a kid.
From Clymer, New York, went to Michigan State, ended up playing for the Bills, so that's really cool. Orchard Park guy, John Cordo back in the day.
Sacred Heart alum.
You got it.
John Cordo.
Yeah, Naaman Roosevelt, who's a St. Joseph's alum,
Yeah.
St. Joseph's Collegiate Institute guy. He got a chance.
One of the bazillion Mike Williams.
Yeah, Mike Williams was here.
Yeah.
He's since passed, but Mike Williams was with the Bills for a while. Joe Licata had a chance for a tryout there, the former UB and Williamsville South star, who's now the Williamsville South head coach. So, yeah, guys have had their chances, but this is another example of that, and it's really cool when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And the UB connection with the Bills, too, is pretty cool with 3 players on the roster that went to UB.
Yeah, Cam Lewis, who's a safety and nickelback. He's been kind of a stalwart the last couple of years, worked his way up from UB, from the practice squad, now a big part of what they do. And then you have Jamarcus Ingram, who had a winding road and ended up at UB and then makes the Bills' 53-man roster, and now Joe Andreessen. So it's really cool. I mean, Ingram was asked about that today, and he was like, yeah, it's something special. And to have 3 guys from a relatively, it's still Division I, but it's a smaller school in terms of football. To have 3 guys from that place all make the Buffalo Bills is really cool. Brandon Beane was asked about that, and he said, yeah, there is some advantage to these guys are in our backyard. It's easy to go scout them, to take a look at them. have them in for local tryouts for pro days and things like that, which Andreessen was a part of, and it works out for him.
The local tryout thing, when Bean brought it up, I did not know this, that the local tryouts, UB, Syracuse, and Pitt. Now, I always thought it was just local tryouts. I didn't realize that there was I think Bean said they used to be connected to Penn State as well.
Yep.
So that's something new. Didn't know anything about that. But, so he mentions Matt Milano, his favorite player as a kid. Milano, one of the updates when they set the 53-man roster. I think I had an idea what they were going to do with Matt Milano. I'm pretty sure most who are around the Bills a lot had a good idea. But, of course, Bean addressing that limitedly, that he's on IR, but he does have the designation to return at some point.
Yeah, and that's big. I mean, I think a lot of us thought that could be a possibility with a bicep injury,
right?
That he could possibly come back, and there was some reporting when we first learned of the Milano injury that could be the case in November, December. Bean wouldn't necessarily close the door on him coming back this season, but also said, we have no expectation. It's too early to have a timetable. So no new news as far as like him coming back in 3 months.
Right.
Coming back for the playoffs, anything like that. But Bean and the Bills did not want to close the door to that possibility. So they leave him on IR for now and just see how he progresses. And maybe, we get to the end of the year and he's back for a playoff run. We'll see.
Micah Hyde's name comes up again towards the end of the Brandon. That's one of those things where it's like, and we'll get into the wide receivers in a moment. Josh Allen, do you miss Stephon Diggs? Micah Hyde, are you coming back? Stuff like that. But the door is still open with Micah Hyde before we move on here, which it remains intriguing with all that's going on at the safety position. But I kind of view it myself as maybe something I was guilty of a few years ago when they brought back Cole Beasley. I thought that was the solution to the Bills' problems going into the playoffs, that, Cole Beasley's back. He was a step off, wasn't what he was during his heyday with the Bills. But I kind of look at Micah Hyde like that. Like, if you need him, it's good that that's a possibility. But I don't know how much I'd want to get into him needing to be back on this team.
Yeah, I mean, Bean is asked about that because, we don't talk to Bean all the time. We talk to him at the beginning of camp, when things happen like this, like roster cuts. So he's asked, is there any update on Micah Hyde? And he said, look, we love Micah. The door is open. We'll keep in touch. And as far as I know, Micah hasn't made a full decision, or at least hasn't announced it publicly of a full retirement. So to me, that door is open. We'll see how the season goes maybe. And I think we've talked about this before. Say, for example, you have a rash of injuries at safety in October, November.
Right.
All right, maybe we call Micah because he knows the defense. He could kind of step in and do it. Micah doesn't have to be away from his family for a whole season, go through training camp, that sort of thing. I don't think it's going to happen, but it still remains a possibility.
Since we're talking about safeties right now, that's one of the positions that suffered a lot of injuries during training camp. Leading up to the season now, it looks like they're getting healthier at that position. Rapp, really the only one who's been involved. Damar Hamlin, missing some time, but has been around. But there were two big injuries, Mike Edwards and Cole Bishop. But it looks like as last week progressed, they were progressing to maybe be ready for the start of the season.
Yeah, they were all on the practice field again Wednesday. That's their only practice open to the media this week. So we won't see them again until next Wednesday, right before the regular season opener. But Damar Hamlin's on the field practicing in some capacity. They don't have to give injury reports right now, so we don't know how much he did. And we're in regular season rules, so as reporters, we don't get to watch the full practice. Today was the first day of that, so we only go out there for the first 20 minutes or so, stretching individual drills. So we don't know exactly how much they did later in practice. But again, Hamlin out there, Mike Edwards out there practicing, Cole Bishop out there still wearing the red non-contact jersey, but doing a little bit more. So last week I mentioned that he was doing some tackling dummy drills, and he would lay up. He'd ease up at the tackling dummy. He wouldn't make the full diving tackle like the other guys were. Today, watched him, made the full diving tackle of the tackling dummy. So that's progress for Cole Bishop. So I think they're in a better spot there. getting healthier there. Of course, Cam Lewis can also play safety when needed to, as well as nickelback. So as far as injury-wise, things are looking up.
Yeah. And who was it? McDermott said he wasn't writing anyone off of being good to go except for Matt Milano, any of the guys. Wide receiver, Andy, this was a hot-button topic for you and I on how many they might carry going into the regular season on the 53-man roster. They go with 5.
Mm-hmm. I think my bold prediction in our training camp preview special on Spectrum News 1 Buffalo was they could keep 7.
Yes.
Wrong. I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong.
But it made sense at the time, Andy, because of the whole...
Well, no one separated themselves, so then I thought maybe they'd keep 7. Well, no one separated themselves, so they just axed that part of the roster.
But they got a couple of guys they like on the practice squad, though, which was kind of one of the things up in the air after the announcement of the 53. So they go with Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Mac Hollins, and that pretty much is how it held during camp of who you would think would be in the rotation. It's just 5 to me just doesn't seem like enough when you're looking to do what you want to do as far as replacing the production from Diggs and Gabe Davis. But then, you know, the light finally turns on in my head, and it's, Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox too.
And James Cook.
And
Ray Davis.
And Ray Davis. So, yeah. So, while I'm not down with 5 wide receivers on the team, I think with the pass-catching weapons that they have, like we always said, Kincaid is going to be considered kind of a wide receiver anyway, so that gets you to 6.
And you're never going to have, well, I won't say never, but rarely do they go a full 5 wide.
Right.
You're either 4 wide and a tight end, you're 4 wide and a running back, 3 wide, even 2 wide and 2 tight ends. So you probably don't need 6. And you got to remember, all last season, they really only carried 5, with the exception of the times where they'd bring Andy Isabella up as a practice squad elevation. So they kind of made it through that season with only 5 most of the time. Now, here's some good news. At practice Wednesday, Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Curtis Samuel both practicing in some capacity. Mm-hmm. New number for Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 15 from 81.
He was 11 and 83 before. It's interesting how he got to 15, but that's just me. I'm big into jersey numbers.
Right. So I think the big takeaway here is those guys are going to be good to go for week 1, because if they weren't, they'd probably have to call up Tyrell Shavers or KJ Hamler or Deion Kane, who's another guy they had just brought in a couple of weeks ago, and they end up bringing back to the practice squad. So, Shavers was a guy I liked and thought he did some good things through training camp in the preseason, but at the end of the day, it's a numbers game.
Shavers got a lot of love out at St. John Fisher.
He did, but I don't think his play in the games necessarily equated. It's hard to evaluate because the quarterback play was really poor for a lot of the preseason. Mm-hmm. Josh Allen excluded that one quarter he played. I think he only threw the ball 3 times.
Yeah, and then he ran, and then they took him out.
Right. So Sean McDermott had seen enough of that.
Yeah.
So, wide receiver is still, to me, the biggest concern of this team. It has been since last draft season, even before they traded Stephon Diggs, before Gabe Davis walked in free agency. There was so much clamoring for, all right, you've got Diggs, you've got Davis, we sign Curtis Samuel, let's still draft a guy. Mm-hmm. So it remains to be seen, when you take away a number 1 wide receiver who was a top 5 receiver in terms of route running, yards, production, all those things for the most part in Stephon Diggs. You can say what you want about him tailing off at the end of last season or a couple different times, but he still put up big numbers. How do you replace that? You don't just replace it, but you need some unexpected things to happen, I think. Some guys to elevate above where they've been in their careers. Maybe Josh Allen's the guy who can do that. Maybe Joe Brady gets these guys involved in ways they haven't been in their careers. And obviously Keon Coleman's a wild card because he's a rookie. I'm still concerned about exactly how the wide receiver room is going to shake out for the Buffalo Bills.
100%. We mentioned pass catchers on the practice squad too. Tight end Zach Davidson also getting to the Bills practice squad as well, and he was another one of those kind of fan favorites. You and I had discussed, would they carry 4 tight ends and 5 wide receivers? Well, they have 5 wide receivers, but the 3 tight ends. But the fact that Zach Davidson made it to the practice squad, I think a lot of these guys that they were hoping to get there, and I think Brandon Beane basically said they got the guys they want back.
Right. So Quentin Morris wearing a red non-contact jersey, he's been banged up, but that would lend you to believe that he's close to getting back. We'll see. And I think Quentin Morris makes it over Zach Davidson because of his special teams ability. He's really good there. I think Davidson made some strides in that department, but he's more of a Kincaid type of tight end, like a more of a wide receiver type tight end than, say, Quentin Morris, who's an inline tight end and has a great role on special teams. So they've got this kind of core with those 3 guys that they like, and it doesn't mean they can't call up Zach Davidson. You know, you get a couple 3 elevations during the season. You can elevate a guy if there's an injury and sign him to the 53-man roster. So they brought back like a lot of these camp darlings that we talked about.
Yeah.
Joe Andreessen makes it, so that's the big story. But like a lot of these guys that were talked about during training camp do end up coming back to the practice squad.
Interesting. Other practice squad guys that you wanted to see back. Frank Gore Jr., really cool. You know, his dad was a Buffalo Bill. He's still here. He had a great preseason, Andy. Turned a lot of heads where we even talked that maybe if the Bills cut him, he might not be there to be on the practice squad. But there he is.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Gore Jr.'s a guy he's not the biggest, he's not the fastest. His dad wasn't the biggest or the fastest. His dad was bigger and ended up, finishing 3rd all time in NFL rushing yards. So there's a long way to go there, but he's another nice player that is depth. He's developmental. You have an injury, you slide him in.
Yeah. The addition of Mike White now as the practice squad.
Funny dude, full of personality.
Right. We mentioned Matt Milano earlier, and, of course, he has a connection to Matt Milano. So while Matt Milano is out recovering from his injury,
6 degrees of Matt Milano.
He's still being talked about. And, of course, we can get into Milano's hit on Mike White when he was playing for the Jets here in Orchard Park. Maybe the perfect legal tackle in this type of NFL.
So somebody actually just in the last 2 minutes sent me a clip of this on X of Matt Milano like a heat-seeking missile.
Yeah.
Oh, just eviscerates Mike White. So I asked, Brandon Beane said during his press conference, one of the reasons we brought Mike White in, it was we appreciated the way he played without fear. He just kind of came in, whether he came in off the bench or was starting when he was with the Jets, he came in and played without fear. I asked Mike White about that, and Mike said, yeah, sometimes playing without fear kind of bit me in the butt, and might have to find one of my ribs laying on the 30-yard line at Highmark Stadium, in reference to Matt Milano just crushing him. One of the best hits you've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
So he had a good laugh about that, and he said one of the conditions of me signing with the Bills practice squad was my locker mate can't be Matt Milano, jokingly. He said Ed Oliver actually came up and apologized for some of the beatings they put on him. All good and fun.
Yeah.
But Mike White was an interesting character, and I think that as far as potential backups go, or even just a practice squad QB, or somebody in waiting while they try to figure out what's going on with Mitchell Trubisky, will he be ready for week 1? You could do a lot worse than Mike White as a guy who's started in the league, has some ability, has shown, like, at one point the Jets thought maybe he's their heir apparent. I mean, that fell off pretty quickly, but he had a couple of really nice games. Came back to earth, I think, against the Bills. You think he had 4 picks playing against the Bills.
I think going into that Bills game, he was still the darling and possibly the future, and the Bills basically put an end to that.
Right. We come full circle, just like Joe Andreessen.
Anyone else on that practice squad list, Andy, that you think it's key that they got back?
One player I thought was interesting that is not, and I didn't expect him to be, but was Gable Steveson. the Olympic gold medal winning wrestler.
Right.
First time ever playing organized football. Brandon Beane said he didn't think that Gable had ever even played a team sport, period.
Right.
You know, there was a lot to grow there, right? Like, he's got the physical traits. He was a little smaller for a defensive tackle, but we talked a lot about the wrestling background. But those things, when you don't play the sport, that are things become second nature for people who play football and play a specific position for a long time. That just wasn't there for him. You know, he said, Beane said, I hope Gable sticks with football, and we wouldn't shut the door to bringing him back at some point. They're just you can't put a complete developmental guy on the practice squad when you've got other stuff. You got to still try to win games and get ready.
Trying to win a Super Bowl here,
right?
So if the chance presents itself, it does. And then one other note that Tyler Bass has taken a lot of heat this summer. While he's connected during the preseason games, he's been a mess during practices.
He did miss the one in the preseason game.
I was watching college football that day.
I know. We had that discussion.
But Beane was asked, have you thought about bringing in a kicker to the practice squad to maybe push Tyler Bass? At this point, no. They know what they have in Tyler Bass. They're just hoping that Tyler Bass can just move on from how last season ended and how the summer has gone.
Yeah, he said we're confident in T. Bass. We understand the questions because we watch practice and we watch training camp, and he had some rough days, missed kicks. And then he missed a 51-yarder, I believe it was, in the preseason game. So I think he was 6 of 7 for the preseason on kicks. So, I mean, there's some level of concern there, but he said, look, we know what we've got in him. If he was a guy that we didn't know could do it in the past and had been very good for them, they might have had a shorter leash.
Right.
They're giving him some leeway to work through that because they know how good he can be. But Beane also couched it and said, look, same time he's got to go out and do it. Mm-hmm. We have faith he will, but he still has to go prove it, that he's still the player that they signed to a contract and expect to be a money kicker. Bass-o-matic. They need him back.
Yeah, he needs to get back into shape. Let's do a little 3 and out, Andy. And why are we still hearing stuff about Josh Allen being overrated? Is this new stuff? Is this the same stuff from earlier in the summer, just rehashed? It just seems like I get up in the morning once a week and there's stuff on social media and on TV about Josh Allen being considered overrated.
It creates engagement. Bills Mafia will go to bat for Josh Allen.
You think that's it? It's simple.
Even though it's one of the smaller fan bases in terms of overall numbers.
Yeah.
We know Bills fans will go to bat for this guy with a passion.
Mm-hmm.
So it creates great engagement on social media. It gets people fired up. Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Top 2 or 3, probably.
No doubt about it.
I think he's top 2. I think he's behind Mahomes,
yeah,
but he's number 2. But there's a segment of people who think that the turnovers are too much and that they haven't gotten to the Super Bowl. They haven't gotten over the Chiefs. They haven't gotten over the Bengals in the playoffs. So that naturally leads to, hey, this guy's overrated. And this was a poll, I believe, of 103 or something NFL players.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a huge, I guess it's like 10% or something, roughly. But I don't know, man. It's just, I don't know how you could think that guy's overrated. He's incredible.
Right.
Think about the Buffalo Bills without Josh Allen.
I even
think if they would have drafted Josh Rosen, where they'd be.
That's who I remember saying that's who they should go after.
Right. Incredible. So, like, people just love to talk about him. It gets people fired up. He's kind of polarizing. I think Josh had he rarely tweets these days.
Yeah.
So that came out this morning, and then he put up a tweet that said, so you're telling me I was voted number 1 best trash talker? Let's go. So he heard it. He heard it, and that gets Bills Mafia all fired up. Like, all right, this guy's coming to take names and kick some booty, right?
Hey, For the Bills' sake, hopefully that's how it goes down, right?
Yeah. He's not overrated, but it creates engagement, so people talk about it.
Yeah. I guess that's the world we live in now. That's what it's all about.
Hey, get those clicks. Hey.
Clicks.
Speaking of click, like, subscribe, comment. No, that's for later.
You can do it whenever you want, Andy.
Yeah, go ahead. Like, comment, subscribe, and share our podcast so we can share in the engagement of clicks.
Yeah, that's what we want. Clicks too. Steelers go with Russ Wilson as their QB1.
Let him cook.
Never a fan of Russell Wilson. I know he had a couple of good seasons in Seattle. Rough going out in Denver. Be interesting to see how things shake out with the Steelers.
Their offense looked putrid against the Bills in that bit of time that Wilson,
I have a feeling that offense is going to go back and forth with the quarterbacks.
Yeah, Wilson and Justin Fields. I mean, Russell Wilson looks cooked to me. I know there's some people that said he had a decent year last year. I don't think so. There's nothing there. Like, he just is a guy to me. Justin Fields, not spectacular, but he at least has that athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can get more out of him than he gave in Chicago.
Youth is on his side, too.
Right. But Pittsburgh is one of those teams that drives me crazy. I don't know how they make the playoffs every year. Somehow Mike Tomlin gets these guys to 9-8 or whatever.
Right.
And they make the playoffs. But they haven't been really, really good in quite some time. They just are kind of in that purgatory territory of we're good enough to make the playoffs, but we're going to usually get smoked in the wild card round.
Scared the Bills a little bit in the playoffs. I
Yeah.
mean, at the end of the day, it wasn't, but I think it was a little tighter than you would want that game to be. Finally, Andy, we know you're not watching Jack Squat, but I got into something.
Is that on Netflix? Jack Squat. New show you've been watching?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me tell you about Jack Squat, Andy. Let me tell you about Wyatt Earp versus the Cowboys. Out on Netflix right now.
Okay.
It basically is a 3-part documentary on what I view as the Tombstone movie. So if you're a huge fan of Tombstone like I am,
yeah,
which I love Tombstone, I'll still watch it whenever it comes on.
Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, yeah.
Some of the stuff doesn't line up, but some of the stuff in this documentary gives you a little more insight on why the fighting was going on and what it was all about.
Okay.
And they talk about the shootout at the OK Corral, and it has that something that we see nowadays in society. At first, the Earps were looked at as heroes, but then the story flipped when the Cowboys presented their side of it and turned themselves into the victim of a rogue police officer wanting to just take down someone he didn't like. So it's real entertaining. It's informative. I like the way it was put together.
What is the name of it?
It's called Wyatt Earp versus the Cowboys.
I'm going to have to check that out because I'm a big history buff, so I like that. Maybe we'll have something to talk about next week on the What You Watching segment.
That's your assignment from me, Andy. I know we'll both be golfing and whatnot separately over the weekend, but check it out. It's like an hour each episode.
Okay.
I still have one more hour to go, but
I got to tell you what gets watched the most in our house, and I hate it. Dance Moms.
All right, we got to go.
It's so bad. It's so bad.
I know. I've seen it.
It's one of the worst shows I've ever seen. And my daughter is into dance. She dances competitively. She's about almost 10 years old. She loves it. My son, who's 6, enjoys it. And my wife will sit there and watch it because she likes like reality TV. And I just think these people in the real life cannot possibly act as ridiculous as they do in this show. And I know that's reality TV.
Right.
It is horrible.
I remember watching it years and years ago. It shocks me that it's still on the air.
There's like a new season. My daughter just binge watched the whole thing.
So many hateable people while you're sitting there watching that show.
Oh, awful. There's not one likable character.
No.
None. Dance Moms.
All right.
Please, jump the shark.
Go away.
Cancel it.
Bills have the Cardinals, Andy, week 1, afternoon game. So a week from Sunday. We'll be back next week on a regular schedule. pretty much so. You got the Bills game week media availability on Wednesday, and we'll be back with that. And hopefully Andy will have watched some Wyatt Earp.
Yeah, and we'll have our Buffalo End Zone season preview kickoff show next Wednesday, right before the opener, 8 o'clock, Spectrum News.
Wednesday's going to be busy.
Wednesday's going to be real busy. We've got Media Day. We've got some sit-down interviews in the works. We've got some nice stories. Cool feature about Chris Brown taking over as the Bills' lead play-by-play man officially.
Yeah.
Lots of good stuff. Stevie Johnson will be along with us to give all his analysis about the wide receiver position and so much more. So we're really getting ready to lock in here on Buffalo Bills 2024.
All right, I've been asked to get some KFC on my way home.
Oh,
so
get me some too.
we're going to peace out here, Andy.
Get me a famous bowl.
I will do that. As always, everyone, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch up with you again next week.